morning, everyone. I am Angelica Yvonne Tañedo, and the next topic we will be discussing are the materials should take into account that learners differ in learning styles. Different learners have different preferred learning styles, and why learning styles are important. It is important for us educators to understand the differences in their students' learning styles so that we can implement best practice strategies into their daily activities, curriculum, and assessments. So it says here that those learners with a preference for studio learning are much more likely to gain from explicit grammar teaching than those who prefer experiential learning. And those who prefer experiential learning are more likely to gain from reading a story with a predominant grammatical feature than they are from being taught that feature explicitly. This means that activities should be variable and should be ideally catered for all learning styles. So what they mean by studio learning? So a studio learner is one who prefers more formal study, such as in classrooms, over learning by experience, such as through chatting with some native speaker. Let's now proceed to the styles of learning which need to be catered for language learning materials. So the first one we have is visual. So visual learners prefer to see the language written down. Visual learners are those who prefer learning by observing things. Using visual aids such as pictures, images, diagrams, and whiteboards help these learners understand information better. They easily visualize information, have a good sense of direction, and usually like to draw and doodle. The second style of learning we have is auditory. So this type of learners prefer to hear the language. Sound and music appeal to these learners who typically have a good sense of rhythm. These learners are usually singers or musicians who are familiar with different instruments and the sound they make. Oral learners are good listeners who normally learn best through verbal presentations like lectures and speeches. For example, an auditory learner may remember everything that was said during a work meeting but has a hard time recalling the information that was outlined in a work report. Common characteristics of an auditory learner includes easily recalling spoken information and good speaking skills. Let's now discuss the third one, which is kinesthetic. So these learners prefer to do something physical. Whether it is by using their bodies or hands, these learners are all about the sense of touch. Physical activities and sports play a big part in the students' lives. Getting hands-on is a must for these learners who love to tinker and learn best when they can do rather than see or hear. Like what we've mentioned a while ago with studio, so this type of learners are the ones who prefer more formal study than learning by experience. So this type of learners like to pay conscious attention to the linguistic features of the language and want to be corrected. On the other hand, experiential learners like to use the language and are more concerned with communication than with correctness. It is an engaged learning process whereby students learn by doing and by reflecting on the experience. Experiential learning activities can include, but are not limited to, hands-on laboratory experiments, internships, practicums, field exercises, study abroad, undergraduate research, and studio performances. Let's now proceed with analytics. So this type of learners prefer to focus on discrete bits of the language and to learn them one by one. They are primarily interested in acquiring new and accurate facts that lead to their understanding of concepts and processes. They learn by thinking through their experiences, judging the accuracy of what they encounter, and examining details. They integrate their observations into what they already know. While global learners, they are happy to respond to whole chunks of language at a time and to pick up from them whatever language they can. They are intuitive decision makers for whom interpersonal connections are important. They like to take their time when learning and think things through. They may have emotional responses to learning, and they like to learn through stories and anecdotes and can often imagine what happens next. Now we have dependent. So these learners prefer to learn from a teacher and from a book. They are very dependent on the teacher to carry most of the cognitive load of a task. They are unsure of how to tackle a new task, and they cannot complete a task without scaffolds. When I say scaffolds, this refers to a variety of instructional techniques used to move students progressively towards stronger understanding and ultimately greater independence in the learning process. Down to the last style of learning, which is independence. So these learners are happy to learn from their own experience of the language and to use autonomous learning strategies. They rely on the teacher to carry some of the cognitive load temporarily. They utilize strategies and processes for tackling a new task. They have cognitive strategies for getting unstuck and learned how to retrieve information from long-term memory. So before I end my report here, I want you to consider first the materials you will be using for your students. It should be appropriate for the age, emotional, and social development, and the ability level of the students for whom the materials are selected. And how do we make sure that those materials achieved? Materials should have an impact when students are interested, curious, and pay much attention to that material. And that is all from my report. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something from me today. Stay safe and God bless. The next topic will be discussed by Mr. Rivera.